Our speaker today, Dr. Brent Cline, is a professor, associate professor of English in our department, and he is an American literature specialist, but he also focuses on disability studies. And today, if you know his personality, you know that he has a great sense of humor, which is something you need, I think, for American literature. Is that fair? But it's also something you need, I think, to be a professor, because we have to laugh often, or we'll grow into very sad people. And so his talk today is titled "Save Your Soul, Don't Be a Leader: Lessons from Monastic Living." So, Brent.
There's an inside joke just happened that you guys will never ever see. Hold that up. Everyone can hear me okay? He said I have a sense of humor, but this isn't a funny talk. That's not it. In the 4th century, in a nunnery in Egypt, lived a woman named Isidora. She was unconcerned with her standing among the other 400 nuns in the monastery, so much so that she worked at becoming the lowest of them all, taking the lowest jobs, eating the lowest food, accepting the lowest abuse of her monastic sisters. A hermit named Patirum, in the midst of his own temptation with vanity, was directed in a vision to visit this nunnery to find the woman who far surpassed him in ascetic struggle. Patirum visited the monastery and spoke with the abbess, asking to see all the nuns. He could not find the one he knew he was directed to see, and asked the abbess if all the nuns were accounted for. The abbess said, we're all here, except the fool in the kitchen. Patirum asked for the fool to be brought out to him, and when Isidora came out, Patirum immediately fell to the ground and asked her to bless him. When the nuns told Patirum that he was asking for the blessing of an idiot, a woman who went barefoot and wore a rag in place of a proper cowl, an unthoughtful woman fit to clean bathrooms, Patirum admonished them all. He told them they were in the presence of a holy woman. The women of the monastery eventually begged Isidora for forgiveness and began to lavish glory and honor upon her for humility and patience. Isidora, in response to this elevation, fled from the monastery. We don't know where she went from there. She's lost to history. St. Gregory the Wonder Worker, a 3rd century saint, fled into the wilderness of Egypt when he became too popular. When messengers came to announce that he had been made a bishop, St. Gregory hid from them to avoid taking the position. St. Macarius the Great, a 4th century monk, fled when church officials came to name him a priest. St. Isaac of the Cells did the same. St. Gregory the Theologian fled when he learned his father wanted to make him a priest. St. Ephrem the Syrian fled from being made a bishop. St. John Chrysostom tried to flee when he was made a bishop. The history of Christian monasticism is peppered with stories of monks fleeing from being made into ecclesiastical or cultural persons of influence. They are not curious about becoming effective leaders, nor are they interested in enlarging their social influence through different methods of maintaining relevance. The greatest monastics of the Christian religion fled from spheres of power, and today I want to explain why they did. I want to explain that what they did is not socially irresponsible, it is not selfish, and it is most certainly not a sign of abandonment for the world or those who live in it. Since 2010, thanks to Robin Bolton letting me know this, there have been between 45,000 and 52,000 books written with the keyword leadership. Since 2010. There have been over 12,000 books published through Christian publishing houses on leadership. What is happening here? What does this mean? Why do so many people want to become leaders? And why are so many people pushing them to become leaders? Are there any books about how to be quiet and submit? Is there a key word for that? Is this what it means to offend our culture? To say, I don't want to be a leader? Maybe in the same way that if you want to make someone or a culture mad, you don't need to talk about homosexuality or heterosexuality. Just say, you don't need a romantic other to be happy. That's what makes our culture upset. And maybe to not become a leader as well. With this many books published on the subject of leadership, it seems a few things are true. Number one, we are very concerned about how to make ourselves into a leader. Of course, since we are buying these books, it must also mean that we don't have the slightest idea about how to be a leader. Apparently, it doesn't come very naturally. 2, we believe that a viable way of learning to be a leader is reading a book, taking a class, or hearing a speaker. Like people looking for stock trading tips or real estate trends, we must be under the assumption that we are the only ones buying the book, taking the class, or listening to the speaker, and the secret mystical knowledge is passed to us alone, and not anyone else who might be under the assumption that they can be our leader. I've never been a part of a leadership class or a workshop, but I do wonder if when you sit in those, do you look at other people and say, you better not be learning to lead me. You're not. Maybe being a leader is like having the voice of God. You're pretty sure you've got it, and you're pretty sure no one else does at the same time. Third thing, I assume based on all this leadership talk, is that we believe that there's a class of people that are verifiably good leaders we can learn from. I do not know how these people came to be known as good leaders, but I would expect it's because someone just counted the number of people who listened to whatever they said. These people are probably rich too. Maybe they got rich and therefore became a good leader. Or maybe being a good leader made them rich. Either way, that means perhaps the 2 best leaders you've ever known were the most popular kid in your high school, and probably Satan too. This talk is Save Your Soul, Don't Be a Leader. This is something of a disingenuous title because I have no intention to give you advice on how to save your soul, nor am I terribly concerned if you consider yourself a leader or not. You might be the Moses of your community, and if that's true and you're a decent human being, then I don't see any reason to talk you out of anything. So let me be clear about what I do intend to communicate this morning. I want to speak to those people, especially students in the room, who don't want to be leaders. I want to speak to those people who think they aren't really worthy to have any kind of flock whatsoever, and to those who fear having people under their influence. I want to tell those people that there is a long history of godly men and women who ran from power and positions of leadership, and their rationale for doing so was good and holy and beautiful. I want to provide, in a culture that is obsessed with telling you it's your duty to be a leader, an alternative to this vision. It is, to be clear, not my vision. I am not inventing any ideas this morning. I am as vainglorious as anyone in this room, and trust me, if you all gave me a rousing standing ovation at the end of this, I would eat it up, right? Maybe even carry me away on your shoulders. But maybe we should try you all booing me when I'm done. Like just a raucous chorus of boos. You can heave something if you like. Hit the footy. Don't hit me. But go ahead and heave something when this is instead, I'm presenting a vision toward leadership that has been held within the Christian faith for nearly 2,000 years. Not completely, but certainly most ceremonially within the monastic movement. One view of Christian history might be to follow the edicts and dogmas of those with ecclesiastical authority. Another view of Christian history, and for today, a view of fleeing from positions of leadership, comes from the monks and nuns of the faith, who fled into anonymity not because they were cowards, but because they loved the world. Monks who advised people to flee from power, not because they despised responsibility, but because they did 2 things. They truly knew themselves, and they had honest compassion on those who wanted them to lead. This morning I am going to refer to several monks who not only lived the monastic life, but wrote about it too. They aren't the only ones I could have chosen, but these are ones that have been important to me. So you're going to hear from Barsanuphius of John, and Dorotheus of Gaza, and St. Simeon, the new theologian, and St. Ignatius Graham Kononov. And those names may not mean anything to you. But these are men who chose the anonymity of the monastic life over palaces and comfort and luxury and influence. On an unrelated note, I learned not too long ago that you could pay $500 to go spend 2 days with a very hip Christian leader. And during those 2 days, you could surf it. Apropos. I'm not going to spend time proving that our culture, especially in America, especially in Christianity, is obsessed with leadership. I will simply admit this is an assumption of mine. Instead, I want to spend some time actually laying out what I think can be fairly assumed when we choose to try and lead or try to teach other people to lead. Being a leader is often cast in ethical language. It is your responsibility to be a leader. To do otherwise is to abdicate God's plan for you, or some such language. With students in the room, and faculty in the room, and myself in the room, our job as critical thinkers is to find the embedded ideology and statements that are cast as truth claims. And the following are a few things that I would suggest are embedded in much of the language of being a leader. Number 1, The first piece of ideology embedded in that desire to advocate or become a leader, that the person who is called to be a leader has arrived in some way. This arrival is almost certainly in terms of morality or maturity, though it might more cynically be an economic arrival too. The rich are good leaders. Kind of like in middle school, when all the tall kids were considered the leaders because they were tall. Looking at you, Matt. I was short and involved in middle school as well. This arrival assumes a wholeness and stability that reveals the leader to be ready to take on the responsibility of other people. Let me be clear in saying I have no desire at all to tell anyone whether they are morally and emotionally stable enough to be responsible for other people. I do know, however, that if someone actively desires to be a leader, they think they are whole and stable enough to be responsible for other people. Unfortunately, we are more often than not the worst judges of our spiritual maturity. The monastics know this sin well. It is the sin of spiritual delusion, where we feel we are more devout, more holy, more responsible than we actually are. It is therefore certainly possible that a person who is my leader actually is holy enough to lead me. It is also entirely possible, however, that the person leading me is victim to a spiritual delusion about what they have attained in this life. And the last person to ask whether this delusion is happening or not is the delusional person. Of course, we are Americans, and we are all but programmed to despise elitism. We sniff out snobs everywhere we go, assuming our level of intelligence, urbanity, and devoutness to be the sign of normalcy. You know, monks are already sort of weird to you, right? Because maybe they believe too much. Anyone over our levels is a zealot or a fool, and anyone under our level is in need of our assistance. What we then create are terms for leaders that are populist and that attempt to deflect images of power. A term I hear a lot in Christian circles is servant leadership. I don't know what this means, frankly. It may mean a leader who isn't a complete jerk, right? That just might be the code for it. It may mean that as Americans, people are suspicious of anything that doesn't sound democratic. So here's an oxymoron to make it sound like we have less power than we actually do. It may mean absolutely nothing, but provide an alibi of humility for our vanity and pride about having people under our influence. I don't know. Number two, the language of leadership assumes we know what's best. It's possible we do. It's possible we just hope we do. Or we simply judge knowing what's best as knowing more than anyone else in the room. I do not hear many claims to good leadership touted as not good leadership, but just better than everyone else's bad leadership. Instead, there's a conclusion that the person being inspired to be a leader has any idea what's going on, and any idea about what needs to happen next. For that to occur, there has to be a massive breakdown of authority and a complete trust in an individual. Of course, since the individual you have to trust is yourself, it's really not much of a problem. And that leads to one of the paradoxes of believing we are leaders. It is truly postmodern in its disregard for hierarchy and structure. The individual need only perform some mild esoteric action like believing in themselves in order to know they can be a strong leader. At the same time, it is wildly collectivist, because a leader can be determined in a vacuum. It's not pastoral. It's just something that you become. It's an ontological category. You are a leader. 3, in this ideology of leadership, it's that impact determines goodness. The success of a leader, and therefore the worth of a leader, depends upon the number of people who are under that leader's influence. Leaders can be known by the size of their flock. Good leaders are those who have massive influence. That's who writes the books. We are very concerned with success in this culture, as probably all cultures are. And we determine that success by quantity. How much money we have, how many Facebook friends we have, how many pairs of shoes we have, and how many people we have listening to us. Perhaps, however, not only does a person with many under their wing not suggest any inherent goodness, but a person who leads no one and does not want to lead does not suggest selfishness or responsibility. The reason we respond to the ideology embedded within this sort of cult of leadership is because of what we want. We want to have power. We want to have recognition. We want to be understood as special. And we want, above all else, to be loved. On the SAU Focus Facebook page, shockingly, I looked at it, right? On the SAU Facebook page for Focus, there's a link to a Barna Group survey. And in it stated that 56% of Americans want to make a difference in the world. At the same time, only 25% had a clear sense of their goals for the next 5 years. This should be comical. It means that 75% of the adults in this country don't know what they want for themselves, but a majority of that percentage nevertheless want to shape the world. Shape the world to what exactly? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that they want a hand in things. They want to be remembered, to be needed, and to be loved. And while these desires are perfectly understandable, the weaknesses they lead to provide the seduction for us all to believe that we can or should be leaders. I do not believe that the following is an uncommon fantasy. Close your eye. I'll take you to it. Close it. You are undervalued or disrespected in some kind of way. People look past you because they do not see you as worthy. Problems arise, however, and you begrudgingly step forward to help. No one has real confidence in you. You're the underdog. You'll never be able to do it. But you keep your nose down and work towards solving the problem. Slowly you win over the doubters. Slowly you win over the others, and soon you are a trusted and influential person. You made it. Some prize or trophy or award is won, and when you are called to receive it, you look out at those who you led and say, I could have never done this without you. This award belongs to all of us. And the sound of applause goes up even more. It's this gesture towards humility. Or maybe you find out beforehand that you're going to win the prize, or that you're going to win the award or the recognition. And so you go beforehand and you tell the people, I don't want it. But in your fantasy, it always leaks out. You never take the secret of you winning that recognition to the grave. Whether it's your inner circle or your family, the secret always leaks out. While not everyone knows about the glory you should have had, some people not only do know, but now know how humble you are to deny the prize, and they love you even more for it. And they're whispering in halls about you, and they love you, they love you, they love you. And the fantasy ends there. Always there, so that your glory keeps going. Now, if you sat down with people, I think very few will admit to this fantasy. I will wholeheartedly, standing right here, admit I came up with this fantasy because it is my fantasy. Ask someone if they recognize this fantasy, and they might feign shyness or indifference about adulation or glory. People will pretend that they don't want the praise and respect and love, because of course they will deny it. But you know who understands this fantasy more than anyone else? Monks. That need to be recognized, to be loved, to be in power and control, which being in positions of leadership allows us to have. Monks understand these things all too well. In fact, monasticism can be understood to be in response to these very needs. Monks attempt to have their lives ordered to the best of their ability to eliminate the opportunity for any of this actually happening. St. Ignatius Brand writes, quote, for a monk to receive honor and glory from worldly people is a sign that this monk is a vessel rejected by God. If we were asked why we want to be leaders, we would never say we want the position because we want power or control. We would not admit to desperately needing to be loved, even though that comes in the form of having authority. We would say it was sacrificial. We would say we're doing it because it has to be done. I know I'm about to read you a long quote, so put your listening ears on. Wow, that went straight back to second grade. That was in my brain somewhere. Put your listening ears on. Oh my gosh. Okay, so put your listening ears on and listen to St. Simeon, the new theologian, talk what he has to say about a monk and leadership. It says, quote, brother, if you have become superior of a people and a flock, look well to yourself and examine yourself with what intention and in what way you have attained such a position. Perhaps you will find that you have sought it, though merely in thought, with the intention of obtaining honor, or for the sake of presiding over them, or for the glory of the office. Perhaps you cannot endure being governed by another brother, because you think that no one else is more devout or learned than yourself. You may wish to gain repute by being abbot, and to become well known by the kings and rulers of the world. Your motive may have been jealousy, not so much that you wanted the office, but rather that such and such a brother should not have it, and so you were eager for it. Perhaps it was because you were ashamed before men, lest all should hear, or some, when they came, should see that someone else was preferred to you, and that they would then condemn you as one who was not virtuous. End quote. St. Simeon goes on to describe how the devil tempts a devout monk to power. And this is how he tempts the devout monk. He says, "You will help lead people to Christ." This is 1,000 years ago, this is being written. You will lead people to Christ. That's how Satan will tempt you into power, says St. Simeon the theologian. Though the way we admit it is to be helpful, to be sacrificial, or to take responsibility by being a leader does not really explain our desire for leadership. It is the grist of rationalization alone. It is perhaps the product of a spiritually polluted soul. The great monks knew this, and they knew they were no better than this. And so they left for the monasteries. Let's consider then what exactly are the qualities that might drive someone to the monasteries. And you will notice, I hope, that they are the reverse qualities found in what I said with the ideology of desire to be a leader. The first is that the monks know they have not arrived. The stories that I gave at the beginning of this talk are not because they hate priests or believe that church authority is inherently wicked. St. John Cassian, a monk who wrote about how a monastic life might be ordered, states that monks should fly from women and bishops. What does a quote like that mean? That women and bishops are evil? That women are nothing but a carnal temptation and bishops nothing but a pompous man in robes? No, it means nothing about women and bishops, and everything about the monk. The monk knows he is weak. The monk does not want to objectify the woman because of a weakness toward lust, so he flees from her. And the monk knows what St. Ignatius wrote, that vainglory feeds on human praise and privileges. The stories of the monastic life where a monk overvalues his own holiness, and thus believes he can handle struggles and temptations and glories above him, only to have this overestimation lead him to destruction, are countless. The monk flees from the bishopric, he flees from the role of clergy because he values these roles, not because he despises them. He flees from leadership in the world because he knows he is weak. The second reason the monks flee is akin to the first, because they have not arrived enough to trust their own discernment. They realize that at the first opportunity they will confuse the will of God with their own desires and plans. St. Dorotheus of Gaza writes, "Learn then, brothers, to inquire. Be convinced that not to set one's own path is a great thing. This is humility, this is peace of soul, this is joy." Do it subtly, but do this. Like subtly sort of like look at everyone else in the room. And how many of them would you actually trust to be your leader? And don't even count the strangers, the ones you know. But you would trust to be your leader. No matter how much they tell you that it's their job, or that maybe they got a mandate from God to do it. The entire enterprise of the monastic life is about submitting one's own will so that the discernment and following of the divine life might be more available. I remember speaking with a monk who has come to be very important to me. In one of our talks, this priest monk made it very clear that the gravity of a monastic life was not missed upon him. Upon turning 50, he would not awake one day and for the first time see how unusual his life is. Our walk had led us to the small cemetery next to the guest house. It held 8 tombstones and concrete crosses, and somewhere in English, somewhere in Russian. Votive candles before all of them. And the monk looked at those graves and said, "When I came to this place, I died to everything I was." He had a career in the arts. It was gone. Relationships largely severed. Nearly the sum total of all attempts at everything made meaningless. I did not feel what it meant to see a monastery through the eyes of a monk, and perhaps for the first time I did not think the monastic life was troubled or foolish. The reality of such a terrifying and strange measurement of a life came only later, when I actually became convinced that this monk desired me to go home and talk to no one about him, whether that be strangers or finding old girlfriends of his. How many of us secretly want our old boyfriends and girlfriends to know how good we think? Why? Who doesn't want that? It's this realization that still causes me to obscure his name right here. To obscure the monastery's name. Though we all, including monks, might imagine our funerals, only monks try to do so from within the box, rather than floating outside of it to see all the crying people. Why do they do this? Because only they perhaps realize the massive effort it is to submit one's will to God. This brings us to the third reversal of the ideology embedded in talk of leadership. If the desire to be a leader is a desire to improve the world, understand that the monastic effort is the same thing. The monastic impulse does not come out of wanting to see the world burn from a lofty perch, but out of love for the world. If I want to be the best baseball pitcher in the world, secret desire, still a chance, small, still a chance. If I want to be the best baseball player in the world, but my form will only lead me to shoulder surgery, practicing my throws is only harmful. And if a person wants to improve the world but has no idea how to do it, or confuses their own will with God, or has the demons of vanity and pride lurking in their eyes, then perhaps it would be better if they did nothing at all. The process of living the angelic life of monasticism is an act of love toward the world, because in drawing closer to God, the path is illumined to others. Order your desires properly, or you will only build a maze. And at the center of every maze you make is a minotaur we have no answer for. What then does all this mean? What does this look like for individuals in this room? What does this look like for someone like me who is a professor, is inherently in a position of power and leadership? Does it mean I just give everyone A's because anything else is an exercise of power? If you've had me, you know I don't do that. Does it mean I just give? What does holding up a monastic vision of life do for all of us in the room, none of whom are monks? Well, it is not a claim for us to be monks. When reading monastic literature as a layman, the absolute most important thing to remember is that it is not written for you. It is written for other monks. And you must therefore convert very carefully the message to something that can be appropriately applied. Drinking water saves you. Breathing water kills you. So too when you read monastic literature. Monks have their own positions of leadership, abbots. In no way in my layman's life can I be given an abbot's total responsibility that he has in a monastery, except perhaps as a father. So looking at it how an abbot behaves might help influence how I father my children. But that doesn't mean I should look at how an abbot behaves and say, this is how I as a professor should behave. Don't believe me? Well, it doesn't seem like anyone is taking investing advice from the father of the prodigal son. Be careful what you make universal. So understand that none of this is a call for us to be monastics. Nor is it a backdoor book proposal of the monk's way of winning friends and influence. So again I ask, what then does this look like? Say at Spring Arbor, what does this look like? I don't know. But I have some sense of a formula. And I'm not suggesting the formula is right for you because I don't know who you are. But I do want to let you know that the formula exists. That the formula is a morally valid approach and does not represent fear or selfishness. First part of the formula, first part sort of gleaned from the monk's life is to repent. It means working harder at the spiritual disciplines which drive you to the divine life. Fleeing from leadership and power does not mean a license to be a slacker. You run from leadership and power as a way of stamping out the oxygen to the fire of your vanity and pride. The flight from power is a demand that you get your act together and continue getting your act together when you think you've got your act together, because guess what? Nothing suggests you have your act together less than thinking you've got your act together. It means to ultimately submit. Submit to whom? Well, that's not easy for me to say. But I will say eventually there comes a time to submit when authority is thrust upon you. When it is forced on you, especially by someone above whom you trust, then you take it. Of those saints I read from before who ran for positions of clergy or the bishopric, eventually nearly all of them accepted. I am not suggesting in any way that your residence hall director, professor, or employer is equivalent to church authority. But as a guide, eventually, when the authority is forced on you, you must take it. But don't seek it out. If you're as cosmically wise as you think you are, it will find you. What authority you have, whether it be as a parent, as an elder sibling, as a professor, as a student, fear that authority. Treat it like a loose rattlesnake rather than a tamed lion. St. Simeon writes of when a monk does get power. He says, quote, "You must then examine yourself carefully to make sure that you are free from all ambition, without a trace of bodily pleasure and lust, entirely pure from love of money and remembrance of past wrongs, perfectly gentle and free from anger. You must have such love toward God that the mere mention of the name of Christ kindles you with desire for him and moves you to tears. In addition, you must mourn for your neighbor and account as your own the failures of other men, and regard yourself from your soul to be a greater sinner than all others. Then you can become a leader. I'm not. It means to do what is right. Just do what is right and don't worry about whether you're leading people or not. St. Barsanupius wrote in a letter to a monk looking for advice on the right way to approach injustice. Barsanupius said, whenever it is necessary to speak for the sake of others and you are worried about it, speak for them. As for yourself, only force yourself not to speak. If you want to head out to Michigan Avenue and protest against Planned Parenthood, then great. Don't worry about how many people come with you. Don't try to convince people. Let the truth or beauty or goodness of whatever the holiness of your action be the thing which motivates others. And if no one sees it, then thank God for the opportunity to stamp out the vanity that sneaks into even our most altruistic acts. Remember, leader is not an ontological category of being. It is at best the byproduct of holy action. Don't worry about leading. Don't worry about being a leader. Act justly, seek mercy, walk humbly. And if you're on your own, well then who cares? You're doing what's right. Relevance and effectiveness are not cardinal virtues. For every Martin Luther King, there are thousands of those, like the grandmother of Frederick Douglass, in an unmarked grave and totally lost to history. But such a fate is no indicator of her fulfillment of a divine role. When I was a kid, I dreamed of being several things. A Ghostbuster. Looking at you, really, I would sing the Ghostbuster theme song into the mirror, pretending I was delivering a speech at a school, and then a kid would scream, "Oh, there's a ghost!" and I would go and bust that. Another one, lead singer of Bon Jovi. I don't know what happened to John Bon Jovi, but somehow I got to be lead singer of Bon Jovi. But when I was a kid, there was a vacation Bible school. My mom was teaching vacation Bible school, and they made these T-shirts. We were doing these T-shirts with puppy paint, and all the kids were doing some, like putting a cross on it or something like that. And I made a shirt for Bon Jovi. Also an NBA basketball star. Those are, of course, absurd things to dream about. But they're not really any more absurd than what I still, to this day, to this second, dream about, which is the principle that unites all of those dream professions of mine when I was a kid, which is that I receive attention, and I receive recognition, and love, and admiration from those around me. I haven't changed my dreams. I grew up and learned that people will mock me if I keep saying I want to be a Ghostbuster, but people won't mock me if I say I want to be a leader. Then they'll think I'm wise. Then they'll think I'm holy. Oh, great goodness, that's what I want more than anything else. I have to flee from these things. And even though I am not a monk, I can still look to the monastic vision for guidance. If anonymity is the real evidence of humility, I will look to those who have proven with their lives they are willing to end in unmarked graves rather than celebrities, whether they be national or local, ecclesiastical or academic, who by trying to make me influential, make themselves a little more influential in the process. Thanks.
We have time for questions. There's baseball.
Seriously, let's just end on that.
It's good reflexes, NBA skills. Questions? Oh.
So, thank you for the talk. Wonderful. So how does, while this talk is helpful to all of us, I think, how does this talk, giving a talk like this, hurt you personally?
Yeah, it's the irony is not missed upon. I mean, this is going to sound like a joke, but maybe the best thing I should have done is just ripped a fart halfway through. I mean it. Because the message stays, but maybe you just laugh at me in the hallway. That's a whole lot better. And look, professors in the room, myself very much included, we have people who listen to our words theoretically every single day. Every walk in life has its demons. And boy, vanity and pride is certainly one of ours, certainly one of mine. That people are listening to what I say every single day, instead of out tending the chickens in a monastery garden. We're listening to me. So you're listening to me right now, but it's no different than what happens every single day when I teach. And so it puts on the onus of me even more that I need to run. And if you say, well, like, it's just, I can't get past the irony of you giving a talk to a whole bunch of people about this. Look, I'm totally cognizant of the irony. My wife brought it up last night when I ran this past. You know what you're doing? Yeah, I know what I'm doing. We had this long fight. Don't worry, I was right about it. She's not here yet. But I don't have an answer besides this is something we have to watch for. This is something we have to be scared of. This is something I have to be scared of. There's a real quick story, which I will get your question. Real quick story. This comes from the Sayings of the Desert Fathers, and it's a favorite of mine, and some of you students have heard it before. But a novice goes to an abbot in a monastery, and the novice says, Abba, Father, I'm struggling with vanity. And the abbot says to the monk, okay, go to the cemetery and mock the dead. And the novice is a good novice. He's obedient to his abbot. He goes to the monastery and just goes up and down the rows, mocking the dead. He comes back. Next day, the abbot says, go and praise the dead. And he goes, does the same thing, up and down the rows, saying how great all the dead are. The novice comes back, and the abbot says, what did the dead say when you mocked them? And he said, nothing, Abba, Father. And what did they do when you praised them? Nothing, Abba, Father. He says, go and do likewise. You will die. You will be lost to history. Might as well get used to it right now. That's the goal. I'm not suggesting that's what I can do. I want awards. I want adulation. But that's the goal. And yeah, we're in a dangerous position. Be careful what jobs you wish for. Good.
In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, Paul says, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to be an overseer, he desires a noble work. How does that fit in with what you just said?
It would be the guy I want to be in power. Right? The guy I want to be in power actually has a level of holiness. So the job of leading someone, the job, for instance, of being a priest or a minister, a pastor, whatever the case is, of being a bishop, these are noble professions. They're good things. So it's not anything about the position. Right? So Paul's thinking about this is a noble thing you would want to do, but are you ready for it? Why do we have seminary? Right? Are you ready for it? Do I want my kid, when he's 13 years old, listening to 15-year-olds? And the 15-year-old says, it's a noble thing to oversee, right? And I say, that is true, 15-year-old, but you're not ready for it. And I'm not as well. Paul says as well to be a fool. Right? To be a fool. So yeah, I think it still works, because it's not a claim of anarchy. It's a claim of trying to kill vanity and pride. And to not be known for the guy who is trying to kill vanity and pride. Right? To actually win. What is your greatest student award you can get on campus? I don't know. To be asked to speak in chapel, that's a big deal. Simone, you're going to speak in chapel later because she's here. She's like, why would you? Have Ron Capico come to you, say, I really think you have a lot to say to campus. And then say no. And say, Ron, I beg you, beg you, beg you. Tell no one you think this of me. Right? Because Ron, if it slips out, it's like I spoke in chapel. Ron says, you have good things to say. You say back to Ron, I might have good things to say, but someone else can say them as well. Someone else can say them. It's not a disrespect to chapel. It's a claim to humility
thank you for wonderful, wonderful talk. One of the things that I was thinking about, as you mentioned, those who fled leadership who then end up eventually going back into it. So people like Chrysostom and all. Oftentimes, their leadership becomes an incredible cross for them. And then, so I think it would be fair to just. I think it's implied in what you're saying. There's to do that second part, to say, I don't want to do this. Augustine didn't want to. Those people end up getting crucified often in the process by being, by doing this in a way that they think is.
And not just those people, because we respect Augustine and John Chrysostom. There are also people who have been crucified who were wrongfully, and not going to say metaphorically crucified, who were wrongfully so, and we still think they were incompetent. So when we look at an Augustine, we're playing into that cinematic narrative of, well, I'm going to be crucified, but in the end, they're going to love me. In the end, I will be remembered in history. No, this is Frederick Douglass's grandmother. It's heartbreaking in his narrative. He just says she's gone. There's no bringing her back. She's totally lost. She has no influence anymore. She's totally wiped off the planet. And that's what the monk is willing to do. Theoretically, I think if I brought a monk up here, chained, some kind of animal, talk to the people. Say, well, maybe that's the goal. We're not doing it either. We would expect it.
So you were talking about how when not to worry about like who you're really like to go, and you were talking about like going to Planned Parenthood and stuff. But aren't we also called to be like showing Christ and being good examples, whether like what we believe? You know what I'm saying? Like we're supposed to be good examples to others also. So how do we fit that in?
Right. Just go be holy. Right. I think embedded in your language is that if you are a leader, you can. This is what Saint Simon the New Theologian says about this. How do you convince a devout person, if you're Satan, to get themselves into a position of pride? That very thought that I am going to lead these people. I am going to be an example. Right? Everyone's very worried about their testimony. Okay, I don't really have anything to say to that one way or another. But maybe the greatest testimony is the person who is scared of having power and is always sort of deflecting. And just be honest with yourself about whether you like being in that position or not. And if you like being in that position, what is happening? So I don't. This is not a prescription for you to how to behave in your life or anything like that. But I know every time I've got people saying "wonderful talk," right? Right? It is a cross, and it's flirting with damnation. I do not doubt that there are people in this room much holier than I am that this is not an issue. Maybe you're that person. Maybe you're that person. I'd just be curious who told you.
How does this idea work in a world where we're trying to make our resumes look awesome and competing for interviews? How do we be countercultural without ending up homeless?
Yeah, right? This is, talking about the professor being in a really bad position, like the job interview is a really bad position as well, because what is the job of a job interview? You're trying to sell yourself as good as possible, right? Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of the career services people are here. No one is suggesting that you go up and in a job interview say, yeah, by the way, I think I could really be good at this job. Also, I really struggle with pornography. So just so I throw that out there. Like, that's not necessary, right? It's a job. It's a job. And when it's in its right position, you don't need to turn that employer into your spiritual professor or anything like that. You don't misrepresent, right? What are my greatest weaknesses? Probably loving too much. No, you don't misrepresent, but I think in a job interview, you're not obliged to turn that employer into a spiritual professor. And that's, I think, another lesson as well, is to know what everybody's role in your life is, right? This is maybe unrelated, but sorry. Not really sorry. But I remember I spent a summer in Russia, and I came back, and someone gave me some of the best advice I've ever heard. And they said, when you come back from this experience, this summer in Russia, listen, you need to have your 30-second story. And you need to have your 5-minute story. And you need to have your 3-hour story. And you need to know who in your life is a 30-second story, and who is a 5-minute story, and who is a 3-hour story. And when someone stops listening to you after 5 minutes because they are a 30-second person, don't get angry at them. Get angry at yourself for not discerning who they are. We are all 30-second people to someone. And we are all hopefully 3-hour people to someone. And it's, I'm trying to bridge that with what a job actually is to you. Right? And a job is not who you are. You don't need to turn that job in. That might be good.
Any others?
Just speaking on testimony and example and our actions, what is our attitude then I think in our younger culture, our younger evangelical ways, testimony and action and example is huge. I mean, we've all been to summer camps where testimony, there'd be hour-long sessions where people get in line to speak about themselves and things like that. What is our attitude then towards that, and do we need to shrink I don't want to say the importance, but do we need to shrink the emphasis on testimony and our actions? And everybody loves a comeback story, but what is our attitude then towards those things and how we use them in our own lives? Because for some it's a great tool and a great useful thing, and for others it's probably advice. But what is our attitude and our approach then towards that as a younger culture?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because telling someone about how you found God is not some wicked thing, right? Well, maybe I'll use a biblical analogy then of the Pharisee and the publican. And the Pharisee goes and says his prayer and walks away, and he's worse for it. And the publican goes up and says his prayer, and it's just this cheap Lord have mercy prayer. And the Pharisee is condemned and the publican is praised. But the Pharisee is not condemned because he said the wrong words. Right? It's not a bad prayer that the Pharisee is making. It is his sort of response to that prayer. And so when you're talking about testimony, it's all in its right place. Should you go rake the leaves of some shut-in? Sure, that sounds like a good thing to do. Could you also imagine a way in which raking the leaves of a shut-in is damning to your soul? I can. As you sit there raking, hating that woman. Or thinking like, hey, well, here comes a car. Oh, I'm working really hard, right? Of course. And so when you're talking about should we shrink from testimony, should we not, I don't want to be up here telling people how, this is what should be done or something like that. But when you say people love talking about themselves, that was actually one part of your question, right? They do, right? And when they talk about themselves, they're the center. So maybe when you get up and give a testimony, you say, I have no testimony, I am struggling with my own. But you see that guy over there who won't talk? He's the holiest person in this room. And my job is to point you out to him and not point you out to myself. Maybe that's an answer. Right? I don't suggest to know that this is how it should be done. But I think the deflection of attention, the drive to anonymity, not saying your own, but the actual drive towards anonymity would be a guiding principle. Again, probably a wishy-washy answer, which you'd expect, because I'm not actually up here as a guy who's successfully done this, right? If it wouldn't get me fired, I could give you a list of all the things that. It won't get me fired, I swear.
First, thank you for recognizing me as the most holy person.
I don't accept it. It was to the aisle, but then he moved over.
No, I didn't.
I think he's talking about me.
Yeah, all the things that you're talking about pride and wanting to be picked out and singled out in the crowds. I mean, I think that affects everyone. It affects me. I go off into crazy daydreams myself. Even when we're speaking, I was thinking of something.
Even when I was speaking, I was doing it too.
Okay.
Right? All the professors know about how I'm speaking, and I'm actually having a totally independent thought in my head. And how does that work?
So it's a fear that I have of that. I understand that fear of that the vanity and pride taking over. And I like what you said about letting it come to you, that authority. Like not seeking it out, like it will find you. That makes a lot. Now, off that, how has marriage helped you in this? Because I mean, you just kind of become a leader, and that's both roles. Your wife becomes a leader, you become a leader. Can you articulate that for me?
Yeah. Well, I think monastic literature, like I said, it can't be applied. Like you can't read monastic literature and be like, this is how Spring Arbor should work. Spring Arbor is not a monastery. It doesn't work that way. But you know what is really analogous to a monastery? A family. And that you have an abbot. And you have novices. But that's the kids. But an abbot in his position of power says, listen, I know what's best for you. And then goes and prays in his cell of, oh, dear God, make me worthy of this. I fear, right? And every parent in this room knows the fear of, what am I doing to my kids? Right? Genetics are obviously a part of it, but what am I teaching them? Am I messing them up? And that fear we have because we love our kids is reflected in a monastery as well, which is, yes, in a monastery you have a very strict hierarchy and submission and things like that. But it's out of love. It's out of love that you order, and it's out of love that you submit. And that's true with the spouses as well. Which is, monks don't need to tell us this. What we fight about when we fight with our spouses is never what we're actually fighting about. And we want the last word. And we want the zinger, and we want to be shown that we're right. We don't want to submit. And when we don't want to submit, we sometimes do this righteous indignation thing, like, well, I have to correct my wife because I love her so much, I don't want her to be wrong about why Parks and Rec is a better show than Community. And it's turned into this hour-long fight about it, right? We pretend that I'm trying to help my spouse. Well, what's the best thing to do is to submit. When they're angry at you, you accept that anger. Just accept it. You weren't right. You were right. You were right in the fight. Just accept it. Right? She's saying something that she's misunderstanding that you did. Fine. Fine. I'll take it. I'll take it. And the reason I can take it is because we're in a marriage. That's why it doesn't work with Spring Arbor. Spring Arbor is not a monastery. You guys are students and professors. You shouldn't try to make it like a monastery. But when you're making that analogy, families. I would just encourage you, those who have families in here, read monastic literature. It's very wise towards how to be a father, or I think a wife, or I can't speak for the other side, but certainly as a father and as a husband. Very helpful.
Well, I think Professor Cline will be here for a few more minutes if you have any other questions, but thank you for coming.